Hi there, I'm Rebecca and a really warm welcome back to my channel, created by Rebecca. This week is the 4th week in my build up to spooky season. It's time to do the final project and then do the big reveal. So let's get started. This week's main model making medium is air dry clay, and we're going to be using a wood slice to mount it on. We're going to be using some wire. We're going to be using a little bit of terrain building, and we're going to be using an LED balloon light like we did last week. And this week's video builds on the landscaping and terrain building skills that we used last week and that were first featured in my lantern Gothic crypt graveyard scene that you will have seen from last year, hopefully. And if not, please go and watch it. I'm starting with my white Das air dry clay. It does come in terracotta, but that doesn't make sense for this particular project. I'm taking the time to knead it properly. This warms it up and makes it more supple. I can always add water if it starts to dry out in my hands. And now I will start to shape it into a loose cylinder, indenting the bottom and rounding the top. Now I'm increasing the indent in the base of the shape. And that will begin to thin the wall of the cylinder. I'm using a piece of scrunched up tin foil here, and it's just to help support the shape as the flared section, the thin section, gets thinner and less stable. I'm going to need to do this until it dries. I've decided that the flared section is a little bit too long, so I'm just pinching off any excess clay. In case you hadn't guessed, this is going to be another ghost. He's not looking as smooth as I would like him to. And I'd like to kind of make those creases look a little bit more intentional. He's also meant to be carrying something, but he's got a lot of cracks at the moment, and we need to have a look at that to see if we can smooth that out for him. I am just poking some eyes in through the clay. And if you watched last week's video, you will know that this is my doll making needle. You could use anything, including clay making tools. In this tub I keep any leftover air dry clay. And when I want to join clay together, I can wet this down and create a clay slip. So something great you can do with slip is to fill in cracks. I'm going to scratch up the surface of my dried ghost just to help me adhere new pieces on. So I'm going to use the slip, as I said, almost like a glue. And then I can always spray water to try and help blend the join. I can add more slip. And I'm just going to use it to exaggerate some of the pleats and folds that I put into the ghost. Just like that. And I can use a silicone tool to help smooth. I can add more water. It's important not to try to have too much clay out at once, because that will just dry and be a waste. But just like with pottery, it's really important that you take time to blend and bond those surfaces together, because if they're not, then they will just crack apart. Now the reason this has cracked so much is because it dried out quite a bit while I was working with it. If I'd kept applying water, that would have really helped stop this kind of almost leathery look to the surface. But I knew it didn't matter too much because I knew I'd be doing this. You don't have to have your water in a spray bottle. You could have a little bowl or something next to you. I just happen to have a spray bottle. You can also sandpaper clay down. On this side, he's actually going to have his arm up. Now, this might take me a couple of goes to actually do this, because I don't want to try to do too much in one hit. So, let's see. I want it to look like he's holding his arm up, which would then be affecting how the rest of his cloth hangs. Okay. And it's probably better to build this up in layers than try and do it all in one hit. Not bad. So yeah, I think I'm going to let that dry. So I might want to build it up a little bit higher, but we'll see. Next, I'm going to make a stick or a twig for my little ghost to hold his lantern on. I've just got some wire. And I'm just going to sort of fiddle about with it until I like it. I've made this long enough so that I can run it down inside the body and fix it, because otherwise I think the lantern is going to be too heavy. Now we're making the stand for my ghost. We're using a wood slice, and I'm just bending some nice thick wire, I think this is possibly 1mm, into a loop that will fit just inside the live edge of that wood slice. And I can twist the ends together once I'm happy with the shape and the size. Take the loose section to the middle of the slice and then bend it at 90 degrees. So we're going back to the foam clay, and I'm going to just encase the loop of his base in the foam clay. This doesn't need to be tall, it doesn't need to be domed, it can be anything you want. It just needs to cover that wire and get close to the edge of the wood slice that I'm putting it onto. That's pretty good. I can just kind of shunt the little balls in just to make sure that they are not sliding down over the edge, but making sure that that wire is completely covered. There's a strong chance this is going to come loose from the wood slice once it's dried. That's fine, I will hot glue it on probably. I've got a couple of bits of the foam clay left over, and rather than waste them or trying to introduce them back into the new clay, I'm actually going to just squish them together and add them onto the top of the piece of wire that's going to support my paper clay ghost. Here we go, and just let that set. I've painted the foam clay brown, and then I've used some of my chopped up jute twine to cover that over. I used the Ranger Media mat again to do that, and now I'm just going to add a little bit more texture with the collected twigs and mud and stuff that I got when I was out on my walk. And I'm just sort of sprinkling these extra bits over the surface, and they'll stick where the glue is coming up from underneath. And of course I've added some extra bits of glue in the hope that they will sort of hang on to the bigger bits of twig and that sort of stuff, which they should do. And I can add in some bits of lichen. And there's a real selection of stuff that I gathered. Little stones, little twigs, little bits of moss, seeds, and it all just blends really nicely with that cut jute twine that I basted it with. I haven't got to worry about the width with this because it's not going inside a dome, it's just going to be out in the open. And because the foam clay isn't absorbent, it means that the glue is staying open for quite a long time, and there's enough depth of glue there that I can sort of squish things down into it to encourage it to stick. And I'm just going to make sure that every surface and side has some little natural detail on it. I've got this lovely leaf that I collected. I'm going to pop that straight on that piece of glue. It's a nice dinky one. Might be viburnum, not sure. So I'm going to let that dry now. Now I'm going to make the accessory that my little air dry clay ghost is going to be holding. And it's based on another one of these LED lights. and I'm going to make a pumpkin lantern. So I'm going to leave the bit where the little cardboard tab comes out, and leave that open, and then just start wrapping the paper clay round. Just taking a piece of wire and run it round the middle of the pumpkin to come out at the top. So I've got my little pull-out tab there for the card. I do want to make sure stays clear of the paper clay. I've taken it then round up to the top and just twisted it together. That's going to help make a little hanging handle for it. And I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to carve away a hole in the centre of this pumpkin lantern. That's what he's going to have. The top layer has started to dry, so it is letting me do this. I'm going to be careful. And I'm only lightly applying water to the surface because, you know, this is an electrical device in here. It is supposed to be waterproof, but I want to be careful. So my air dry clay ghost is now dry, and I'm going to give it a coat of white paint. Air dry clay has this kind of greyish, yellowish tinge when it's dry. I like to kind of lift that to a more bedsheet white if I can. So I'm going to use some of my Jo Sonja titanium white. I have sanded this off. I used wet and dry sandpaper to just smooth out any texture that I don't want. And I did most of my sanding outside because nobody needs to be breathing stuff in. So nothing complicated about this. I'm just going to start painting. That is now poked down through my ghost, and you can see there's enough stem that it's going to push into the foam base that I've made. I think I might just try and anchor it inside with some more paper clay. I've made a start painting the pumpkin that my little ghost is going to be holding. And I'm just sort of aging it, darkening it. Adding shadows. And then with a damp paper towel, I can just get back some of those slightly cleaner orange colours and leave the grunginess in all the recesses. Right, now we're going to test my ghost on his base. I took the piece of wire that I'd been using on my pumpkin lantern and I twisted it into a loop so that I could hang it off the stick that my little ghost is holding. And then rather than chopping the tails off, I sort of twisted them up and used them as a little bit of extra detail on the growth that's happening on the top here. So that they almost look like the sort of twisty vines that you get on pumpkins when they're growing. Then I used some of the Ranger Medium Matte and I just sprinkled some of the terrain mixture onto the wire stick to make it look kind of mossy and licheny and gnarly. I think that's worked really well. And that is my little hovering air dry clay ghost finished. And he is hovering. You can just make out the two pieces of wire that are holding him up off the base here, but they're very discreet. I think he turned out really well. I think he's got just the right level of crustiness compared to the sort of crisp bedsheet look about him. And I love his little lantern. I think those tiny lights are brilliant. And the great thing about the way they've made these lights, I've been able to leave the tab available so that I can push it back in again and shut the light off or pull it out when I want the light to be lit. And that's true on the little terrarium from last week as well. And that's fantastic. Otherwise, it would just be on forever. But I can save these, save their batteries, and continue to use them year after year. When it does finally run out, I'll have to make him a new pumpkin. So finally, let's have a look at the big reveal. All 4 weeks projects together. And there might be a couple of others that I've added in as well. If you're interested in seeing how I made those, ask me. I'll make you a video. Right, that's it for this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, share and subscribe to me here on YouTube. And until next time, bye.